Sunday morning, May 3rd. Congressman Joe Kennedy is with us live in studio this morning. Let's go on the record. The search for the best policies as the state and the nation look beyond the COVID-19 crisis. How Representative Kennedy hopes to steer America to better times.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
And welcome to a live edition of OTR this Sunday morning. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. We are live this morning with Congressman Joe Kennedy III, and it has been our practice ever since the pandemic began. We have for the past several weeks, and we continue to do today, respecting social distancing guidelines. Our studio is large enough to provide proper spacing, so Congressman Kennedy, although perhaps on that one shot he might have looked a lot closer, he's about 100 feet away. He represents the state's 4th district and is currently a candidate for U.S. Senate. It's great to have you with us, Congressman, this morning. Thank you.
Ed, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Testing is the key to safely reopening the country, and Massachusetts is doing more than testing, doing more testing than most states, over 10,000 a day, but we still need more here. What can Congress, specifically, what can the House do to make this happen in spite of the White House claims that there are plenty of tests out here?
So, Janet, the first thing is acknowledge that there's not. And look, the failure that this administration has failed to resolve with regards to our testing regimens from the very beginning of this crisis and the onset of it has kept us behind the 8 ball here from literally the moment that COVID-19 hit our shores. And so what we need to do is, 1, acknowledge it, 2, ramp that up, and then 3, support state efforts that are moving the ball forward here. Now, Governor Baker's and the administration has put forward a very aggressive and robust contact tracing plan. We need to actually scale up those tests. And what you've seen is Congress, under House Democratic leadership here, appropriate in the last rescue bill $25 billion to try to scale up testing. We pushed for, in the rescue package before then, language in that package to actually provide additional resources to our surge capacity labs to increase testing capabilities there as well. We need to ramp up testing across the country. We need to do this community by community so that as we do open up, if there are flare-ups, which every public health expert expects that there will be, we can identify them, and then we can isolate those that had contact with them, and we can make sure that these flare-ups do not spread to an entire second wave.
Do you advise the governors to secretly or privately get their own resources and try to hide them basically from the federal government for fear that they might confiscate them, as Governor Baker and many other governors have done? Do you advise that this is a best practice policy at this point?
Look, I think when it comes to the very fact that we have to have this conversation about, in order to provide for the needs of American citizens, whether governors across this country should be hiding equipment or not fully forthcoming with the equipment that they've been able to obtain, is shameful, and it's embarrassing. I have maintained close communication with the governor and his administration over the course of the past several weeks, talked to them frequently, multiple times a week. And from the very beginning, literally probably 6 weeks ago, as this crisis was starting to ramp up, when I spoke to the governor, I said, "What is it that you need? Where can we help?" He said 2 things: PPE and testing. And we went right at both of those, but I can't tell you how many hours out of my day still you're trying to track down PPE from all corners of the world because our federal government can't do it and also won't do it. That's what's stunning about this. They won't.
Let's go through a couple of things very quickly because people at home, and there are a few things uppermost in their minds right now. Number 1, should the FAA simply require all airline passengers to wear masks indefinitely? What do you think?
I think that we have to be guided by the science here. And if the science is saying that people need to maintain social distancing and that we need to make sure that people are going to stay safe and stay healthy, putting a whole bunch of people on a crowded airplane for hours on end with air circulating through the cabin doesn't seem to me to distill a whole lot of confidence in flyers that they're going to be healthy and safe. And if we have to take those, I think, appropriate measures to ensure that health and safety and to increase confidence that people can go on an airplane and not get sick. So,
should prisoners be released from jail because of overcrowding?
I think on a case-by-case basis, absolutely. Look, we cannot get into a circumstance where you are allowing for, or perhaps not taking the proper mitigations from people that are going to create an outbreak inside our prisons. Now, that's not to say any prisoner, right? That should be done on a case-by-case basis. But we've seen in various outbreaks across our country from inside jails and prisons that after it starts, Ed, it's extremely difficult to get your arms around it. And we don't want to be putting people that might be behind bars because they haven't made bail, all of a sudden contracting a deadly virus. There's I think, appropriate mitigation steps that we can take that are in line with our principles of justice.
There was an incident at an ICE detention center in Dartmouth on Friday, detainees rioting over COVID-19 testing. What answers are you looking for in this particular case?
Very simple ones. What happened? Right? What we've seen from the sheriff's department there is one story and one recitation of facts. What I have heard from lawyers and advocates and individuals that had loved ones who were involved, present at that facility, is a very different story. And all that we're calling for is an investigation, a federal investigation, to find out exactly what happened. That is the bare minimum that I think we should expect, and I think the sheriff deserves, and by the way, obviously our detainees deserve.
The sheriff termed your inquiry as political. You were being political.
This isn't about me, and it's not about him. It's about making sure that our principles of justice are followed, that everyone in the midst of a global pandemic that is a very contagious virus, that everyone from the guards to the personnel to the administrative staff to the inmates and detainees are healthy and safe and have the proper healthy and safety concerns put in place. And that's it. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that this obviously blew up into an incident where multiple people were sent to the hospital, we want to make sure that we know what happened, that there's accountability, and that it doesn't happen again.
Congressman, one of your big issues right now is mail-in voting. You want primary ballots automatically sent to all registered voters. But there are 4 political parties, and the Secretary of State says mailing unsolicited ballots at this late date can't be done without sacrificing security. Is he wrong about that?
I think we can, in fact, do this. And Janet, that's not just me saying so. That's a number of activists and organizations from around our Commonwealth, from Common Cause to our entire House congressional delegation to Maura Healey, who've leaned into this and said that this is something that should be done. 1. 2, multiple other states already do this. And 3, given that the innovation and intelligence that we have in this state, I have a hard time believing that we can't do it. And the last part here that I think is critical, 50% of the registered voters in this state are unenrolled, which means if we're just going to mail ballots to those that are affiliated with one political party, and there's more Democrats, registered Democrats than any other party in this state, but you are disenfranchising or putting a significant obstacle to obtaining access to a ballot to 50% of the registered voters. I don't think that's fair, and I think we can do better.
I think the independent voters are actually closer to 60% right now, but the Secretary has said that in most of these other states that do this, they've had a long time to pull this together. We would only have 4 months. Most cities and towns, he says, also have limited staff and can't handle the flood of ballots that would be needed at this point because they are at reduced staffs right now. How do you respond to those?
Janet, I think it's critical to just kind of think this thing through for a quick second, where if we don't do this, what happens, right? If we don't do this, you set ourselves up for a circumstance that we saw in Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago, where our government forces people to choose between protecting their health and protecting their democracy. And we, as policymakers, essentially mortgage our future by saying, hey, we're going to leave an election, a critical one, in September and November, up to those folks who are willing to take that risk, or for some folks that are willing to have access to PPE, or who can wait in lines for extended periods of time. Remember, in Milwaukee, there's normally 180 polling locations. There were only 5 because they couldn't find sufficient poll workers to keep the other ones open. If we have a second flare-up, it's going to be difficult in Massachusetts, perhaps, to find people that are going to go staff all of those polling locations. So I think the risk that we wage by not taking aggressive measures here to ensure that every ballot is counted and that every person gets one is far greater than the challenge that we confront by trying to do so.
Would your election to the Senate be severely hampered if those ballots are not mailed to independent voters, since there are so many independent voters here in the state right now?
Don't know and don't care, right? This isn't about my electoral prospects. This is about making sure that in a state like Massachusetts, where we hold ourselves out from being a progressive bastion and leading the way on fundamental civil rights issues, that our record on this isn't as robust as we might think, particularly when we know that other states not only do this, but do this well and have been doing this for a while. Massachusetts can do this too, and I think it's time that we step up and do so, particularly in the time of a global pandemic.
Let me ask you about presidential politics. First of all, yes or no, have you endorsed Joe Biden?
I am 100% behind Joe Biden. He is not called to ask for an endorsement, but I 100% support him. I will do everything I can to ensure that that he is our president come January.
And you originally, as you know, we all know, you endorsed Elizabeth Warren in the race. Now that she is out of the presidential race, would you urge Biden to pick her for vice president?
I think Senator Warren will excel at any position she has. I obviously think she'd be a great president of the United States. I think she'd be a fabulous vice president. I would urge the Vice President Biden to consider her. I think she would serve our country extraordinarily well in that position. And I think she just does a bang-up job in the U.S. Senate. So wherever she goes, she will continue to serve well. And I have no doubt that that commitment will continue for years to come from her.